In the summer of 1920, thousands of people lined up, four abreast, down a narrow Boston street to hand a stranger their money. He had promised to make them 50% richer in 45 days. He said he had found a loophole in international postage. He had found no such thing. To back the money he was taking in, the world would have needed roughly 160 million of those postal coupons. Only about 27,000 existed. He was not buying coupons. He was taking the new money and using it to pay the old. And when it was over, his name would become the name of the crime itself. This is the case of Charles Ponzi, an immigrant who landed in America with a couple of dollars in his pocket, became for one dizzy summer one of the most talked about rich men in the country, and gave his name to a fraud that still robs people 100 years later. It is the story of 8 months, tens of thousands of believers, and the single piece of arithmetic that brought it all down. Charles Ponzi was born in Italy in 1882. By his own account, he came from comfort and had studied in Rome. What is certain is how he arrived in Boston in November of 1903 aboard a steamship with almost nothing. He drifted through the jobs an immigrant with no money took: dishwasher, waiter, clerk, and along the way, before Boston ever knew his name, he had already been to prison twice, in Canada for forging a check, in the United States for smuggling other Italian immigrants across the border. It was in a Montreal bank, years earlier, that he had seen the trick for the first time. The bank paid its depositors interest it could not possibly earn, and stayed alive by handing new deposits to old customers. Then it failed. Ponzi watched how it worked. He would remember. In 1919, back in Boston and married, Ponzi received a letter from Europe. Inside was a small printed slip called an international reply coupon. The coupon was real and legal. It let a person in one country prepay the return postage for someone in another. And because the First World War had thrown currencies and postal rates out of alignment, a coupon bought cheaply abroad could, in theory, be redeemed for more in American stamps. A tiny gap. A real one. Ponzi told the public he had turned that gap into a machine. He set up a company around the turn of 1919 into 1920 and gave it a grand and confusing name: the Securities Exchange Company. The promise was simple, and it was enormous. 50% profit in 45 days. Double your money in 90. At first, almost no one came. A few $100s, then a few thousand. And then, in the spring of 1920, the word caught. It moved the way these things always move. The earliest investors were paid, exactly as promised, and they told everyone they knew. Visible, happy, paid in full winners are the best advertising money can buy. By April, 150 people had handed over something like $140,000. By May, the total was approaching $500,000. By the height of the summer, Ponzi was taking in hundreds of thousands of dollars a day, at times approaching $1 million. The crowds pressed down School Street four abreast, money in their fists: clerks, widows, shopkeepers. Reportedly, a large share of the Boston police force. People remortgaged homes and emptied savings to get in. For a few weeks, Charles Ponzi was the most famous man in the city, and he looked the part. The sharp suit, the cane, the straw hat. In 8 months, he took in, by estimates that vary widely, something like $15 million, and by some accounts as much as 20 from tens of thousands of people. But there was a problem with the story, and it was not a matter of opinion. It was a matter of counting. A financial analyst named Clarence Barron looked at the claim and did the sum in public. To back the money Ponzi had taken in, he calculated, roughly 160 million of those postal coupons would need to be in circulation. The number that actually existed in the entire world was about 27,000. And Barron noticed one more thing. Ponzi, the man selling 50%, kept his own fortune in dull, ordinary assets, earning about 5. He did not buy his own miracle. The Boston Post, which had first written him up as a wonder, began to publish the doubts. And doubt, in a scheme like this, is not a slow poison. It is a lit match. The moment enough people stopped fighting to get in and started asking for their money back, the machine was finished, because there had never been a machine. No wealth was ever created. There was only the new money and the old. Ponzi tried to hold the line. He paid out over $1 million in a single day to calm the crowd, and roughly $2 million across 3 days, handing frightened investors their cash to prove he was good for it. Then his own hired publicist, a man named McMasters, examined the books, saw the truth, and wrote it in the Post. Charles Ponzi, he declared, was hopelessly insolvent. Millions of dollars in the red. The government sent in an auditor. The auditor found what Barron had promised he would find. A company millions of dollars insolvent, with essentially no real coupons behind any of it. Investigators reportedly turned up about $61 worth of the actual thing the entire empire was supposed to be built on. In mid-August of 1920, federal agents shut the office on School Street, and Charles Ponzi surrendered. He was charged federally with using the mails to defraud. In November of 1920, he pleaded guilty and was sent to prison for 5 years. That was only the beginning of the accounting. When his federal time was done, the state of Massachusetts came for him on larceny. The first trial acquitted him. The second deadlocked. The third convicted him, and the court named him plainly for the record, a common and notorious thief. Even then, he did not stop. Out on bail during his appeals, he surfaced in Florida selling swampland with the same impossible promises, was convicted again, and tried to slip out of the country disguised as a crewman on a ship before he was caught. When the money was finally counted, the people who had trusted him got back less than about 30 cents on the dollar. Ponzi served, across the federal and state terms, roughly a decade in all. He had never become an American. So in 1934, when the last cell door opened, the country he had dazzled and robbed put him on a ship and deported him. The rest is a long, quiet fall. Italy, where he did not prosper. Brazil, where a job with an airline collapsed in the war. A stroke, blindness in one eye. His wife, who had stood by him through all of it, divorced him at last. On the 18th of January 1949, Charles Ponzi died in the charity ward of a hospital in Rio de Janeiro. He left an estate of reportedly about $75, just enough to bury him. He did not invent the idea of robbing new investors to pay the old ones. He simply ran it so brazenly, in one Boston summer, that we named it after him. And we have needed the name ever since. It was there under Madoff. It is there somewhere today. Because the arithmetic never changed, new money paying old is not a business, it is a countdown. And the record, when it was finally counted, showed exactly what Barron said it would. Nothing behind the promise at all,